Hello, hello. Welcome to the Global Citizen Therapy Podcast, the podcast for women of color who are daughters of immigrants to feel seen, heard, and validated. My name is Nancy Diaz, and I am a trauma-informed therapist, speaker, and your podcast host today. And now, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to the Global Citizen Therapy Podcast. Okay, so today we're doing something a little bit differently. So I have with me here Pauline Peck, which if you haven't heard already, we're doing a workshop together and I'm super excited about it. So in honor of BIPOC Mental Health Month, we're teaming up because Pauline, I found her, man, was it just a month ago? Time has flown by, but I found her randomly. I've been looking for a while. I think I have mentioned this, that I've really been hoping to connect with another therapist that specializes in working with daughters of immigrants. And I found her on Instagram, as I usually do. And yeah, just so excited to have her here. So we're doing a workshop called Love Beyond Expectations, Empowering Immigrant Daughters in Dating and Relationships. And we're going to be hosting that free workshop. And I know that 27 of you, I haven't even checked the numbers today, but 27 of you have already signed up. And we've asked you to submit your questions that you have, burning questions that you have about this workshop. So in today's very special episode, we're going to be answering those questions. So yes, very exciting. And if you haven't signed up yet, please do and still submit those questions. And we will make sure that we get those questions answered in some way, shape, or form. But yes, very excited. Pauline, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Please introduce yourself. Give us all the amazing details. I just can't even believe that we even went to the same university. Like that to me is crazy. Like all
at the same time. We
the
overlapped at the same
time.
time. So it is
Wow.
just, world is so incredibly small, and
Small.
sometimes social media reminds us of that.
Connects
But
us. Yeah.
right. My name
Yeah.
is Dr. Pauline Yeghnazar Peck. I'm a licensed psychologist in Santa Barbara, California, and I specialize in working with the daughters of immigrants as well as intercultural couples. And both of those come from my own experience of being a daughter of immigrants. I came to the US at the age of 4 from Iran, part of an Armenian family. Armenians are diasporic people, so Iranian Armenian is how I identify. And I'm married to somebody outside of my culture after having been divorced. And there's all those pieces that make it so that I can relate to what are the unique challenges that the daughters of immigrants face. And especially with this workshop, how that shows up in our relationships, especially in relationships outside of our culture. But honestly, it's difficult regardless of who the relationship is within your own family, romantic relationships, all of that. So my own healing kind of presented an opportunity to then provide service and space for other people who are doing that healing. But I want to make it very clear, I am still healing. It is a continuous learning process, and so I grow kind of alongside my clients. And that's kind of why I'm here and showing up. And it's so nice to connect with you in the sense that you also being in this raw kind of space of both professional as well as participant and person within the community. And so that's what I hope to offer as we answer these really thoughtful questions today.
Yes, yes. Thank you to those who have submitted these questions because, yeah, they're thought-provoking questions. And I just wanted to say, my God, yes, I think that this is going to be definitely helpful for both of us as well, not just for the people that are going to be attending and participating in the workshop, but for us healing, that inner child, that younger Nancy and Pauline who needed help with navigating relationships and with dating and all of these things because yeah, we don't really have that space to talk about it in the media and movies and TV shows. We don't really see that representation. We're seeing it a little bit more now, thankfully, but still, we still have trouble identifying what's a healthy relationship, what's an unhealthy relationship. There's just so many questions, there's so many layers to this. So yes, we're gonna do our best to answer a few of these questions here. But yeah, I love that you mentioned that, yeah, of course, we're therapists, but we're also, just two women that are healing together and trying to create that community that was lacking for us. So yes, super, super excited. So let's dive into it. Let's answer these burning questions. I wrote down in the form, what are your burning questions? And I think that, yeah, this first one Man, it's a good one. So I'll actually just read off of it. I know that we have
Yeah.
like our little notes here, but man, I just want to read this whole question because I loved it, how it was
Yeah.
written. So loneliness. I am the daughter of Asian immigrants and would love for you to talk about loneliness as it might relate to daughters of immigrants. I have a very wide social network, but have struggled since middle school to feel like I have a strong, close inner circle with strong emotional connection. This is even the case in my family of origin. And in fact, I've always felt like the black sheep. So, Pauline, do you want to tackle this first? I mean, this is such a great question.
Hmm. I have I have to like hold my curiosity because each question presents 14 million more questions that I
Right.
have for this person. Is
Right.
like I'm just like wondering so many different things of what is a deep meaningful relationship for them. What was that shift in kind of from middle school on? What are they most lacking in when they're saying I don't have deep meaningful connections or a close knit circle? Like what's the vision for what that close knit circle would present and offer to
Hmm.
them? And it also makes me think, like, in what ways are they really different from their family? In what ways did they learn how to be close to others within their family? So what are some of the kind of cultural norms within their family's culture, not just the kind of larger Asian culture, and how did those influence kind of how they show up? And then I'm really curious about this large network that is kind of juxtaposed by this like really almost like lonely feeling, this feeling of not being understood, not being seen, not being emotionally intimate and vulnerable with other people. It's interesting. I was just having a conversation with a client of mine about some of this, of how she never really learned emotional intimacy within her family network, or sorry, within her family of origin. And so while she also has kind of a wide social network, she's found that she doesn't really know how to be really intimate with people because she didn't learn that from her family. And although
Yeah.
she's in therapy, she's doing that work. The more she does that work, the more she actually feels out of touch, both with her family of origin, because they're not healing and growing and
Right.
learning at the same rate, as
Yeah.
well as with other people, because she feels like, you know, relevant to my age, I still feel like I'm like at a different place than them. And so she's finding that while she's putting this effort in connecting the links, she still doesn't feel really connected to her family of origin or connected to other people, because it's hard to feel like they're at the same place in the chronological age because of the developmental history and difference in their experiences. So I've got lots of questions as well as like some of the links that I'm throwing out there. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on this?
Oh, my thoughts. Yeah. I think that this is definitely one that I struggle with. And I know that, yeah, my clients, yeah, we bring this up and we talk about this because it's definitely something that when you don't have that strong connection with your family of origin, your parents, your siblings, then yeah, it can be really hard to go into a romantic relationship or to have these really deep connections with friends. And yeah, sometimes I do kind of relate to this question because sometimes it does feel like, wow, there's so many people around me and I have these friendships. But yeah, I think in general, we're not really used to being open and vulnerable. And, sometimes we
Hmm.
see these friendships in movies like, the famous Friends, of course, where,
Hmm.
yeah, that close inner circle, right? And where you can just talk about anything, right? And when we
Yeah.
don't grow up having that, and then we try to have that with friends who also maybe didn't grow up having that, it can be really hard because
Yeah.
you want something that you don't even know, right? Like you said, like we're still healing, we're in therapy, but we're still learning how
Yeah.
to communicate, how to tune into our own needs, how to advocate for ourselves in friendships. This is something that, a client and I were talking about this, like sometimes my friends can be a bit disrespectful, but we've been friends for years, for so long. And this is just kind of the dynamic where, like I'll feel a bit hurt and maybe like I'll take a step back for a little bit, but eventually, like it's just water under the bridge and we just keep going. And yeah, and it's been like that for a lot of daughters of immigrants with parents as well, right? That whole, it's swept under the rug, we don't talk about it, there's no apology needed, and we just move on, but we're still hurt and we're still trying to navigate, and we're learning in therapy like that it's okay to have our own needs, it's okay to voice those needs, and it's okay to say like, hey, I want something deeper, I want that more intimate connection, whether it's with a romantic partner or with a friend, and I think I've been learning that with certain friendships as well of, like, yeah, maybe if you can't go deep and you can't fill those needs, then maybe, I take a step back because it's important for me to have those needs met, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said,
Yeah.
it's we're on this journey, and sometimes there's that disconnect that our family, our friends are not there. And so sometimes
Yeah.
it is, and it's a really difficult, decision. I've been having these conversations with quite a few clients of, I'm struggling with that grief of having to
Mhm.
let go, and that fear, right? Of the loneliness. Like I already feel pretty lonely because I don't have that deep, intimate connection with these friends or with this romantic partner. But if I say, okay, no, this is a little bit too much, you're not respecting my boundaries, I'm gonna leave, then they're worried that there's going to be even more loneliness, right? Because those
Yeah.
people are not in their lives. Yeah.
I would give the biggest kind of encouragement I would give to this person that asked this question is kind of a gift of self compassion here, right? If you didn't
Yeah.
grow up learning how to do this from your family, and if you feel out of connection and not even totally able to be your full authentic self with your family of origin, no wonder this is a struggle. Like maybe we can let go of this um, goal of having this close internet circle like friends. Especially, it always struck me watching that show, which I wasn't like a huge fan of, but knowing that show and growing up with that show, the kind of like gender, like both genders in kind of a platonic connection, and sometimes they date and sometimes they wouldn't. That was also mind boggling to me because
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of friends that were like that, that were beyond like the church setting. So in any case, what I'm bringing up is the fact that if you didn't get it from your family, and then when you see it, you've got this expectation that you should somehow look, your family or your friendship should look like that. Maybe you can let go of that pressure on yourself, that somehow I almost like hear underlying the question, this assumption that they've like failed somehow because they don't
Mm.
have this thing in their friendships. And when you look at the family and the messages that we're talking about, the particular difficulties, it makes sense that this would be a challenge. And so maybe I can offer some self compassion, some gentleness, letting go of the pressure for your friendship life, your like relational life to have to look a certain way. And then
Yeah.
just to say, if I didn't learn it in my family, maybe I can figure out how to get what are some of those ingredients of being able to draw people in or understand which people would be able to give me emotional maturity, emotional responsiveness. Maybe there's things I can learn, but then it might take time for me to employ what I can employ, as well as kind of be on the lookout for inviting those people into my life. And it might be that in my 40s or in my 50s, I have that connection, but maybe my 20s and 30s are going to be spent doing that relational work internally, as well as that experimentation with others. So can we let
Yeah.
go of the timeline, let go of the expectation? You haven't failed, question asker,
No,
because you don't have this like perfect TV
it'll
best friend
come.
click. It'll
Yeah.
come if this is a
You'll
goal of
attract it.
yours. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then back to the whole, do you know what that meaningful connection is for you? Because
Yeah.
everybody needs
You
something
have that
different
with
and wants
yourself.
something different. And can you have that with yourself?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think, and this actually leads us perfectly into the next question, which
Yeah.
is about the authentic self. So I kind of love that segue.
Hmm.
So let me read it out. So I'd love to know how we can foster our authentic self and ask for our needs in the online dating spaces because they seem to be so geared toward Western values. Thank you. All right, Pauline, I'll let you tackle this first.
Hmm. First and foremost, you know, online dating is a tool, but it's not the only way to meet somebody. And the tool can be used how you want to use it, even if it's not exactly the way it's intended to be used. when you use it in a way that it's not intended to be used, it might be a little bit more difficult and effortful. So just kind of setting some expectations. If online dating is not geared, it's geared toward maybe more superficial connections, is that a tool for you to connect to someone you might not connect to in real time and quickly transition to trying to get them off the app and in person, because that will then be a tool. And I hear this from social media. I think we could plug in social media to this. Anything that's kind of beyond just meeting someone face to face or meeting somebody through your network, it can be a tool for meeting, but it's not necessarily meant to then dictate your entire behavior. And if you feel like, ugh, continuously texting with someone, being on social media with someone and following each other and storying, following each other's stories, but not connecting, if that's not working for you, use it as the tool to connect to someone and then try and get into that zone that allows for more authenticity as quickly as possible. So I kind of take that empowerment approach of like, your feelings about using the apps and the online dating, kind of what's coming up for you in the online dating space. It's information, and you can use that information to be strategic about how you use the apps. The apps are not using you, you're using them. So you can mindfully
Yeah.
use them. Know it's going to be some effort. It doesn't feel the same as meeting somebody in real life when you can kind of open up in that way. And of course, it's going to be a little bit more effort, but I think you can work with it rather than against it. And I also know people who don't go the app route and still are able, with other efforts, to meet somebody if having a romantic partnership is important for you. And so, I just recently had a friend that was like, this is what I'm looking for. If you've got someone in your network, in your husband's network, think of me. And I was like, I love this. I wish
Yeah.
more people would kind of
Yeah.
put themselves out there. It's like using your network as a matchmaking
Exactly.
and connecting things. She's like, I connect
Yeah.
to you. This is what I'm looking for. And I loved that. So know that you don't have to feel like I won't find a partner if I don't fill in the blank, use this tool, whatever that
Right.
tool is, if I don't do. And so I'm really kind of hoping to give some empowerment to the person asking this. Listen to the
Mhm.
information that's being given. These are just tools. There are multiple ways to get to where you want to get to. Don't lose sight of the goal if having a romantic relationship feels important to you.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I'm actually going to answer this question and take it in a bit of a different route because
Cool. I
one
love
thing
that.
that's been helpful for me, because yes, I have tried the online dating thing, and yeah, there's sometimes a lot of frustration. And like you
Yeah.
were saying about those superficial connections, 100%. And so, yeah, and I know a lot of my clients feel the same way where they're like, oh, I'm taking a break from the dating apps, taking a break from dating in general. I'm like, that's okay. So, again, like, bringing in that self-compassion, but taking that time for yourself, because the question again is about, the authentic self. So I'm actually going to encourage you to, yeah, take a step back and actually reflect. Give yourself that time and space to look at what it is that you need. And then from there, decide what is going to feel best for you. Is it online dating? Are you willing to give that a try again? Or do you want to try something else? Like right now,
Hmm.
for me, I'm like, oh, the apps don't feel good for me. So I'm instead going to tons of different events, and
Yeah.
just and making it about meeting people and making connections, regardless of whether that turns into something romantic or not. But,
Hmm.
I've taken that step back, with my therapist, we actually work through like, what is it that I'm looking for? What's important to me? What are some of the non negotiables? I think that this is something that we don't really do, in society in general, is taking that step back, taking that moment to actually think about, and not just the superficial, because I think, for women, there is, sometimes that question amongst friends of like, oh, well, what's your type? That's usually the question. And you have to answer, such as, oh, tall, dark, and handsome, and he has to have
Hmm.
this kind of job and whatever. And I think for so long I heard that from friends and things like that. And it's well intentioned, but I think it's very superficial, right? And I've had to let go
Hmm.
of that because, yeah, I think for some time I thought like, well, no, I need to date someone who has my level of education or who has a certain type of job because, I have had in the past experiences where, a partner has felt threatened by my education or job or whatever,
Yeah.
so I thought like, yeah, this makes sense that I have that kind of expectation or kind of non-negotiable. But now I've, reflected again because you evolve as a person, right? And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, that was years ago. Now let me look at it again. actually, it doesn't really matter to me what they do for a
Yeah.
living. And that is kind of superficial. It's more about like their values, right? And so,
Yeah.
and for me, what's been helpful, even with the online dating, is asking, questions like that. And that will tell me a lot, even if I ask the question, like, what are your values? And to me, if someone can't answer that question, it means that they haven't done a lot of that inner work yet,
Hmm.
and I for me that's important. Someone that's on that same kind of journey as I am of personal development and who's taken that time to reflect. And even if they haven't thought of that question in particular yet, they're willing to like, oh, you know what, that's a good question. Like, let me think about it and get back to you. Or I think, this is important to me or this is not. But yeah, I think for me lately, it's do those values line up with my own? And if they don't, like, how do I feel about that? Right. And just taking that step back as we're dating, because I think so often, and I mean, even I tried speed dating, I think 2 months ago, and I was like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. Like, this is not for me. But putting yourself out there, like you said with your friend, like trying different approaches and being open to whatever comes. And I think that that's how you connect with that authentic self. Okay, you tried something, take a step back now before jumping into the next thing and the next approach, and just reflect. Did that work for me? If it didn't, why not? For me, it was just like too overwhelming. And I'm like, but I'm glad that I tried it. Right. And I'm like, okay, cool. Now I can say, like, this didn't work for me. I might try it again in the future, maybe, and see if there's other spaces that maybe, we're less packed in and things don't move as quickly, but that's okay. Like, just honoring that, right? Did you want to say
Yeah.
anything about the Western values before we move on to the next question? I don't think either of us touched on that.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't know enough about like the particulars of dating apps, but I think there are dating apps that are clued in on the cultural piece. And so I think that, you know, I think that there have been some movements toward having more inclusive dating apps as well as other ways in online spaces to be able to connect people culturally. They don't have to be from the exact same culture, but to be able to identify some cultural values at play. So again, I don't know if I have anything to add beyond the EU, academic institutions are also based on Western ideals, but you can do school the way that makes sense for you. You can get the supports, you can kind of strategize, and you can take a break if you need because it's a
Yeah.
lot to interact. So I think I come back to like, it's how you use it as well as are there ways that you can find those cultural pieces? I think that oftentimes in the online dating space, what I do know is that there can be a lot of stereotypes and even, emojis that represent like, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I don't want in terms of these very, very stereotypical and prejudiced, discriminatory, racist ways of identifying. Know that that's just then not your person. And it takes a lot to see that and to feel like that's coming up. And so maybe it will be limiting the time that you're on those apps, what apps you use. And like you said, having a more mindful approach, knowing that, okay, sometimes when I'm in this, it's just too much. It's just too overwhelming.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll add there is just, goes back to kind of what I said of reflecting on what's important to you. So if it's important to you, that they have more of your similar cultural values instead of these Western values, then looking at that. And if you're not finding that on the apps, even if you are looking at, non-traditional apps, like Pauline mentioned, I think that's a good
Mm-hmm.
suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, then maybe moving on and just experimenting, exploring, like trying to find the joy in dating, right? Because it is an experiment and it can be quite fun. So trying to connect with that and see it as, something that can be enjoyable instead of something that seems like a chore or something that you're doing out of obligation, that kind of thing. There's
Yeah.
just a lot of
Yeah.
exploring that can be done here. But I
Yeah.
want to be mindful of time and move on to the
What you
next
said was
question.
actually like a nice little segue of like dating and even when you're in a relationship dating. So it's a perfect, perfect lead into you reading the next one too.
Yes, yes, because the next one is about dating. So let me pull it up here. Okay. So, what about dating your spouse? How can we encourage date nights within a marriage in a macho culture when this doesn't exist? Oh, I love this question. Go
I
ahead.
love it. I'm constantly wanting to redefine. I think that's like part of the work that I do, as well as like the kind of person I am. And my own healing has been to like, kind of rebel against some of these things. Like, why does it have to be a date night? As a parent of two young children, date night is not going to happen. Date day, date breakfast, date, lunch might happen. And so, I think that sometimes we get fed this ideal romantic picture. It needs to be a date night at this like frequency. This is how often you should be having sex. This is what that should look like. And I just want us to like put all of that to the side and to think about what a date night offers you or is the vehicle to. Is it mindful, intentional, quality time together? Is it exploring new activities so that you're continuously learning new novel things about each other? Like, what is it that date night provides? And I think so often, especially in like a social media or even like a superficial thing, you see you get dressed up, you go out, it looks like this. It's the 3-course meal. It ends in this kind of sexual activity. It's like, it's so rehearsed, and that then plays out in all the rom-coms that we see. It doesn't have to look like that. And marriage is just a long-term relationship. And in a long-term relationship, you're going to have so many different seasons. And I think letting go of this like date night is the ideal, and anything you're doing outside of that, it's kind of reminding me of the friendship kind of piece. Anything
Mhm.
outside of what you're seeing, feeling like a failure, it's not a failure, right? There are lots of ways in which you can get close to your partner, connect to your partner that don't involve that kind of date night, especially with the kind of underlying assumption that like if you're in a heterosexual relationship, the male person would be like surprising you or spoiling you or planning it to a T. Not every relational dynamic is going to look like that, regardless of kind of sexual orientation or gender. Sometimes one person is better at planning, and that has nothing to do with gender. And so even letting go of some of those pieces, I'd be interested in like where the machismo comes out. Is it the sense that um that she should be planning all of these things? Is it the sense that showing appreciation or being romantic would be seen as a weakness? Like, I'd be interested in like where those deeper things that the machismo is presenting, where that becomes an obstacle to connection. Because dating in general is just another way of saying intentional time that we set aside to connect. And every relationship, every couple in different seasons is going to do it a little differently. So that's kind of where my mind was going with all of that. But I'm curious to hear from you too.
Yeah, actually, when I was reading this question, I was thinking about, yeah, the macho culture. I wonder if it's actually, when I think of this macho man, I think of someone who struggles to connect with their own emotions, right? And be vulnerable. And as you were talking and, talking about redefining what this date night looks like, I was like, you know what? Yeah, sometimes you don't need to go out to the candlelit dinner and do all of the things like in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I was like, you know what? If I was in a relationship, what I'd want is just to like curl up on the couch with someone, not just to watch a movie because like that's not what I'd be
Yeah.
looking for, but to have
Yeah.
that conversation, right? Like when we were first dating or that kind of thing, right? So, yeah, asking yourself, like, what is it that you want from that date night? Is it the conversation? And this is where maybe tuning into your love languages can help a little bit too. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
is it that you want? Is it the physical touch, because like you mentioned, like sometimes date night has the assumption of sex afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
so is that what you want the date night to be, kind of the pretext for that kind of physical touch? Or is it like you mentioned, the spoiling? Is it gifts? Is it attention that you want? Do you just want
Mm-hmm.
help with the kids or with the housework? Or is it more emotional support? Do you want him to ask you about your day, or do you want to know more about him? Like, what is it that's missing? And so figuring out what those needs are and then being able to communicate them. And it doesn't have to look, I think the way that we think of it of sit down conversation of using all these terms that you're maybe learning in therapy, it doesn't always have to look like that. You can turn it into whatever way feels natural for you. So if you are dating this
Mm-hmm.
kind of macho man, and you can find a way to communicate with him that doesn't have to feel so forced and unnatural, but just try to like sprinkle in like, hey, like this would be nice. This is something that I'm looking for, and whatever way that feels natural for you. But yeah, definitely communicate those needs once you've figured out what those are, and invite that person, that partner to also, like what do you want? Like if you don't want, what I want, like how can we compromise, meet in the middle? Like what are your needs? I want to make sure that your needs are being met and that my needs are being met, right? Because yeah, I think when you want these date nights, okay, great, let's talk about it. What do you want out of those date nights? So that's the one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I would add.
Yeah,
But
and I think
yes.
sometimes even coming to those conversations in this like partnership, machismo can be like an obstacle to that. Even
Yes.
having this egalitarian conversation of what do you want, what do I want, already sets people up in this equal kind of position, whereas machismo is so much about dominance. And so I think even
Mhm.
that can be really difficult to navigate. And so sometimes I think, is there a way to be able to give, it's almost like to work within what is possible first before there is going to be ushering in some change. Like even just spending some quality time together, if you might have to plan in the beginning, might lead the way for a different dynamic kind of in the future. Right. So it's
Yeah.
like not like only waiting for that other person to come together and have that conversation for that to happen. That might not be realistic for the relationship right now, but that doesn't mean that the relationship can't get there, because oftentimes that dominance underneath it is inadequacy and deep fear. And so maybe you might have to be the vulnerable one that suggests something, or the one that compromises by saying, look, you know what, you choose, so that other person can feel safe, knowing that, okay, we might get to a more equal place when this person also feels safe. It's like a very fine line between caretaking and actually being generous when you have the emotional reserves to give, and not over giving, but giving in a generous act of then, oh, that will actually make it easier for us to get to a place where there's kind of mutual compassion and understanding for one another.
Yes. Yes, I agree. No, I love it. This was such a good question. All
Mm-hmm.
right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this one was also one that I liked. Um,
This.
Feeling like you don't fit in with your cultural group or Americans, feeling too cultured for Americans, but too American for your culture group, struggling with this my entire life. Yeah,
Me
and
too, girl.
so yeah.
Like, me too, girl.
This
Like,
is yeah, this is why we're that's why we're here. This is why we
this
decided to
is
specialize in daughters of immigrants.
literally, that could be our motto: when you're to
Yeah.
this for that and not enough for that, like it's just, this
Mhm.
is so the crux of the biracial and multiracial experience, whether it is literally that you're, and I always like to make this distinction, some people are like mixed race, right? So they definitely are this and that there are people that are multiracial, and then there's the immigrant experience, where even if you're kind of monoracial or monoethnic, you've already got this bi
Right.
relationship or multi relationship,
Bicultural. Hmm.
but because of the kind of cultural immersion in another culture outside of your parents' kind of native country. So those words are important to sometimes kind of parse out. Is like there's both like your kind of what is it, ethnicity and race, as well as the additional pieces of kind of where you grew up, moving, immigration, and all of that. So all this to say is that I've never met somebody kind of bicultural, bi-ethnic, immigrant, and hasn't felt like this, hasn't
Right.
felt like, where is my space? That is literally why we exist, to say, this is your space. This
Yeah.
is your space. We are your space. The others who can say, we might be very, very different in terms of even you and I, our ethnic background, our stories, but there is this feeling. And I can imagine if we had all the daughters of immigrants here and we took a poll, who has ever felt like you could fit in everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, you're too much for one group, not enough for another, I could bet you every single hand would go up. Every single hand would go up. This is the hallmark of this experience. And so I just want to offer so much empathy. I have been there, especially as somebody who is white passing and who has that privilege. I have so many years just like thrown away my ethnicness, try to be as white as possible, and then somehow they would always find out, learn my last name. Now it's Peck, but it used to be Yeghnazar with a silent H. See my parents, hear another language being spoken, and there would be this like, oh shit, like they found me out and they've realized I'm other. And so,
Mm-hmm.
there people with, I think, darker skin can't do that. You're not going to be able to assimilate in the same ways that I did, but I definitely felt that sense of like, the closer you are to whiteness, it's like the more you want to be able to be in these white spaces because they come with privilege, and
Hmm.
yet you don't belong there either. So I think that regardless of what your actual ethnicity is, as well as what your immigration story is, as well as what your skin color is and your phenotypical makeup, this is so much the reason why you and I create the space to say, even daughters of immigrants, that phrase, like,
Yes.
oh, this is something, this matters. The book club
Hmm.
that I run, the book that we chose for this month was Crying in H Mart, by
Mm.
Michelle's honor, and she's Korean on her mom's side and white on her dad's side, and just kind of
Mm,
so many things. I don't share that, right?
yeah.
And so many things she
So you
said, and
relate.
so many things I could
Yeah.
relate. And so I
Yeah.
think it's the biggest kind of encouragement I would give you is find others who can relate to that. Find others who look like you, others who ate like you, find others who moved like you, find others who had parents who had similar values than
Yes.
you. Like in all of those realms, find people, because a community absolutely does exist. And when you
And it does
feel
help.
that, it does help. It really does
Hmm.
help.
It does, yeah. And I think this is why you and I decided to specialize in this, right? Because we saw that that community definitely does help. It makes an
Yes.
impact because all of this feeling not enough, not worthy, it definitely can take a toll on our mental health. And so finding those spaces where you feel like, oh, I've found my people, even the people that you follow on Instagram, the podcasts that you listen to, the movies and shows that you watch, the books that you read. Yeah, it's amazing because you all of a sudden feel less alone. Going back to the original question, right? Of loneliness. And I think all
Yeah.
of us can kind of relate to that loneliness. You could be surrounded by people who love you and that you love, and still there's that disconnect, right? That even your own family might say, look, you're not ethnic enough, you're not Western
Mm-hmm.
enough, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so feeling that is definitely something that we take seriously, and which is why we created this space. And yes, I love the term daughter of immigrants. I actually have been asking around here in Australia if people use that term or if they use different terms, because I think, yeah, every country is a little bit different. And here, yeah, they use, someone told me, oh, they're called third culture. And I was like, oh, interesting. And someone else said,
Oh,
oh no, we're called second gen. And I'm like, oh, okay, interesting, and everyone just has their own different definition. But I think, the common theme here is that we're looking for that word, right? And so,
yeah.
yeah, I like daughter of immigrants because there's no cultural piece with it, right? And so that's
Mm-hmm.
actually why I say, and people ask me all the time, like, why don't you do content in Spanish? Like you'd be able to relate to so many Latinos and things like that. And I'm like, I can, and I love it. And I can do sessions in Spanish and in Spanglish and connect in that way. But I said, no,
Mm-hmm.
what I've realized is that daughters of immigrants, whatever country they live in, whatever cultural background they're from, there's this common thread, this
Yeah.
all these similarities, this feeling of not being enough. And so yeah, and since moving here, I was like, whoa, there's hardly any daughters of immigrants from Mexican parents or even from Latin American parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at least I didn't find them in the beginning. I'm finding them
Yeah.
slowly a bit more now, and that's been helpful. But in the beginning, I was like, okay, so there's more Asians here. Obviously, in Australia, we're closer to Asia, so there's more Asians here. So right away, I was like, whoa, oh my God, your parents are Indian, and I can relate so much to you, right? Or
Yeah.
your parents
Yeah.
are from China. Okay, but I still can relate so much to you. There's still so many similarities.
Amazing.
Your
Yeah,
parents are
it's
from
so
the
amazing.
Philippines, but there's still so many similarities, right? And so I encourage you, to find that group. And that's why we're creating this community. And the other thing that I just will quickly touch on is that I actually love the title that we ended up going with is actually empowering immigrant daughters. And because lately, the conversations that I've been having, because I have a lot of friends here in Australia that are migrants themselves to this country,
Mm,
but they're still relating to this feeling of not being enough, right? And we've had these conversations quite often.
yeah.
And there are some migrants who can't relate, and they've told me this, like, oh yeah, like I know people that are, like daughters of immigrants, and they feel like they're not enough. And, like I don't feel that way. Like I'm Indian or I'm whatever, like, and I know that, right? But there are
Mm-hmm.
some migrants, and I think the longer you are in another country, they start to feel that way too, right? They're losing that connection to their culture. They're feeling like they're not really from that culture, but they're not Australian or they're not American or Canadian or whatever. And so, yeah, you start to also feel like, oh, well, which one am I? And there's that piece of that cultural identity. So I know you and I talk about this quite often, like within our own social networks and your book club and me in the podcast. So yeah, I just encourage you, take advantage, join the workshop. I'm also hosting the soul care versus self-care workshop where we can connect more
Mm-hmm.
with the authentic self. So
Yep.
yeah, take advantage, find these communities. I know both you and I are going to continue doing this work and continue, in our own ways, creating these spaces, these communities so that we can, yeah, grow together. because I think
I love it.
there's definitely some beauty in that. And just real quick,
Hmm.
I'll read off the last question.
Let's do it.
Yes, so we're on to the fifth and final question. Man, we can just kind of go on and on about these things, but
I know this is like so exciting
so
for us.
good, right? Okay, so the last question is, what are some solutions to pressure from the family to entertain certain relationships that might not be compatible? So talking about the pressure from family. So yeah, what are some solutions when you're feeling that pressure?
I mean, I have an entire course about boundary setting with immigrant parents and how to get through it. It's super quick. And a lot of the tips that I use in that are to translate. One of the biggest things that I use as a coping skill is to translate. So the pressure that your parents are, I absolutely am validating that there is probably pressure. If you can translate it as, what is that about from their cultural lens? From their cultural lens, maybe it's that they want me to be happy. They don't want me to be alone. They want me to be accepted in society. They want me to have a good standing. So reputation is really important in collectivistic cultures. They want that. And so if I can kind of think about the intention, even if what they're saying is like, when are you going to get married? What about this person? And like, oh my gosh, this person, I have nothing in common. I would never even entertain a date, let alone like a lifetime with this person.
Mm,
You can get so caught up in how it makes you feel, which is so valid. And yet you lose out on what they're trying to say. And just like going to another country where you don't know the language, you might have to think about the intention. Someone says something, what they
right.
said doesn't really make sense, but
The
you can see the
fear.
smile on their face and you can
Mhm.
see that they're offering you something and they think it's positive, or they're saying something about you that they don't mean is offensive, but is a difference. And they're saying, oh, orange shirt. And you're like, oh my God, they're making fun of my shirt. You might have felt like, oh my gosh, they're looking at me and doing all of that, but their intention might have been something different. And it's interesting because we talk, the intention doesn't matter, the impact does with behaviors. It does, but when you're talking about your family relationships and how to navigate it, having a translation is useful, because then you can say something. Grandma, for the 50th time, has said, when are you going to get married? And he said, Grandma, I know you want me to be happy. I want to be happy too. Immediately in translating, I have cut, either I have to leave this conversation or I'm yelling at grandma, you always ask me, which, oh my gosh, now I violated 15 other cultural norms. And so then I don't want to show my face for the next family party. And now I'm
Right.
not seeing my family and eating the yummy foods that they make. I mean, you setting boundaries, it oftentimes can hurt us too if distance is the only thing, or explosion, which then hurts the relationship. So I just find translation, which I go into a little bit more in the course, to be this like simple thing. Whereas, what is the intention underneath what they're saying? If they grew up in an arranged marriage, got married at 19, had 15 kids by the time they were 30, right? If that's their family story, of course, you being 26, single, working on your startup business is going to make
They're
no sense to
worried.
them, right?
Yeah.
They're worried. They want positive for you. So
Yeah.
translation is kind of like a quick and dirty thing, and I will say, like, it is important to also remember, rather than succumbing to those pressures, it's remembering it's going to be your lifetime. Like, you obviously don't want to entertain being in a relationship with someone or having a long-term partnership with someone that's not right for you. And also, because I love the both, and also sometimes I'd be open, because my own story with my husband was, initially thought no, and here I am years later, 2 kids later, happily married to him. Is sometimes you set up, like you were saying, those superficial things. Oh, they
Right.
have to have this job and that
Mhm.
job. Sometimes grandma might say somebody that blah blah blah, and you're like, no, grandma. Okay, when you see that it's from a positive intention, you can actually listen, and maybe there is some nugget of usefulness. Maybe what you're seeing is not compatible. Maybe it's helpful to say, what do you think is compatible with me? You keep offering people, you want me to be happy. What are you seeing in my personality? Why did you think that person would be a good fit? Now you're having a conversation, and
I
maybe
love
your
that.
parents, as out of touch they might be with your life here, maybe they know a thing or two about you, or have something to
Yeah,
offer you in what
maybe.
could be useful. So that's the kind of translation, just helps to not have to create this, like, either I succumb or I have to explode or create distance. There's like a middle ground of conversation, connection, and yet still honoring, like, I'm not going to marry somebody just because my family,
Yeah.
for my family to get off my back. So that's
Yeah.
my kind of quick little nugget of like, yeah, advice and guidance here.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that quickly. I think that a lot of times it is that fear. that's underlying, right? And so exploring that with them, like,
Yeah.
what is it that you're scared of? And sometimes, we already know that they're scared that we're going to end up with no one to take care of us, right? And I've
Yeah.
had these
Yeah.
conversations with friends where we're actually talking about a very real fear that they have, right? And so they have to explain to them, like, no, I'm actually, financially independent, and I have a plan, I know what I'm going to do. And so, having those conversations, they can be really difficult, but
Yeah.
sometimes really necessary. And I know that I've had to have, difficult conversations with my parents about some of my life choices, and, even like not having kids. I'm like, I don't want kids. And they're like,
Yeah.
what? This is mind blowing. Like, this is new
Yeah.
information. I can't handle it. And
Yeah.
so, but yeah, sometimes they are necessary conversations, because you don't want years and years to tick by and they still think like, oh my God, like, time's running out. And I'm like, no, for me, it's not that time's running out. It's just that I have made this decision. And so
Hmm.
sometimes it is helpful, and I love what you said about, yeah, translating. But yeah, it just, yeah, offer yourself some compassion here, because sometimes these conversations, they can be really hard, and you're not going to get them right on the first time. And,
Yeah.
I just shared something on my IG story yesterday that was talking about, you're doing all this healing work in therapy, and you're thinking that you're good, and that you know how to communicate, and, use the I statements, and, connect all these pieces, and then you spend time with your family and it all just kind of goes out the window. You get activated right away. And I'm like, man, I can relate so much to that.
Been there, been there.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm like, if
And
this
it's not
happens
all
even to
on you.
therapists,
Yeah,
then
no, and
yeah.
it's not all on you. Like knowing where the exit sign is useful. Like if
Yeah,
you come in, you can have all those intentions, but they're, it's like they're bringing a very
yeah,
different energy to the conversation. It's not
yeah,
going to be useful. It's not all on you to have it go well. You can just do your part of trying to start it. And sometimes it just means, okay, we can't talk about this now, not
yeah,
because of me or not because of you or some combo of both. So learning where the exit sign is also still a very useful and permissible
yes.
and, you know, supportive strategy there.
Yeah. So I'd say the solution is just be kind to yourself as you start
Mm-hmm.
navigating this and having these, difficult conversations that you're not used to having, that your family members are not used to having. It's new to everyone, and this
Yes.
kind of goes back to the first person who said about feeling like a black sheep. I think so many
Mm-hmm.
daughters of immigrants can relate to that. So many of us, if you're listening to this podcast, I always say you're a cycle breaker already. Like, you're wanting to do
Yeah.
things differently. You're wanting to
Yes.
prioritize your mental health, your well-being, your own needs. Everyone
Yep.
who signed up for soul care versus self-care, they want to learn,
Mm-hmm.
like, how do I take care of myself when this hasn't been modeled for myself and my family? Everyone who signed up for the dating and relationships workshop, they want to learn, like, yeah, how to navigate all of this. So yeah, we've had a blast. I've had a blast just
I've had a blast
answering
too.
this
This was great. I
question.
can do this every
Yeah.
week. Like
Yeah,
keep submitting
no,
them. I
for
could
sure. Yeah,
literally
keep
do this every
submitting
week
them.
with you. This is so fun.
Yeah, yeah. So having these conversations, I think, again, healing for our
Yeah.
inner childs,
Yeah,
for sure,
absolutely.
because
It gives me
didn't get to
life. Like
have
if I
this.
knew at 12, I'd be sitting here talking about like,
Yeah,
oh, this is a universal experience. It's not just
being
something
able to
little
help
Pauline felt.
people. Yeah,
Amazing. That would just
yeah,
be, that would give me life knowing that. And so
yes,
just like offering
exactly.
that to my inner child. Yeah, we get
Yeah,
here. It takes a
yeah,
long time, but we get here. And
we get here.
hopefully for those listening, you can get there a little faster just because you have these resources available
Yes,
to you. Like you don't have to
yes,
do so much fumbling on your own, which is what I say. If someone can take a little bit of a shorter path than years of
exactly.
kind of having to unlearn and
Yes,
be unkind to themselves, be so confused, I feel like I just feel so grateful for this community as well as the communities that are now existing out there for the children of immigrants. It's amazing.
exactly. Yeah, I love that. So yeah, we're going to continue to have these conversations. So again, if you haven't signed up for the workshops, make sure to sign up. The links will be in the episode description. And of course, you can find them on our social media. But yes, Pauline, please tell everyone how they can connect with you and find you, and make sure that they're following you and supporting your work, connecting you, because you're creating amazing spaces for daughters of immigrants as well.
Thank you. Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram as my like top platform. Even though I'm on TikTok, I have like a, measly 12 followers or something. I'm definitely much more active on Instagram, Pauline the psychologist. I have a group practice in Santa Barbara Noor Therapy and Wellness, and that's the website as well, Noor Therapy and Wellness. Noor means light in Farsi and pomegranate in Armenian. So you can check out all the resources, the course I talked about, the free book club that I have. I've got a free translation guide if you just want a little tiny taster of what that would look like. I break down 3 common scenarios. So that freebie is on my website, as well as we offer therapy services in California. I've got 2 associates that work in my practice, therapy services in California, as well as New York. If you are global beyond California and New York and you want to work with me, I do have a one-on-one program called the Culture and Connection Transformation Program. And that's a kind of one-on-one psych ed curriculum that I've developed that I support daughters of immigrants through. And it's been so cool to be able to do that beyond therapy. And so lots of ways to engage. Instagram is a nice hub, as well as all of the resources and offerings are on my website, noortherapyandwellness.com.
Yes, amazing. And I'll make sure to include those links so that people can connect with you. But
Sounds good.
yes, we would super appreciate it if you can share far and wide the workshop that we're doing together, because yes, again, free workshop. Definitely don't miss it. Take advantage, sign up for all the free offerings. We know that you love learning, and
Yeah, and
all
it's
daughters
BIPOC
of
Mental
immigrants
Health
love.
Awareness Month. So
Yes,
yes, like this, we
exactly.
deserve it. And there's a month here for us. So
Deserve it.
get it.
Exactly. We deserve the healing. We deserve the therapy, the group support, all of it. So yes, sign up, share with your circles, and yeah, we'll definitely keep doing what we're doing and make sure that we create this beautiful community space for you. So
Perfect.
yes, that's it
Thank you,
from, thank you so
Nancy.
much for coming on, and I will leave it there. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, I am here to be open, honest, and vulnerable with you because you are not alone. If you want to support this podcast, please make sure to leave a review so others can find it as well. If you're interested in working with me, you can find me at www.globalcitizentherapy.com. And if you'd like to heal your relationship with self-care and learn more about how to find the type of soul care that works for you, you can find the link to my workshop in the description of this podcast episode. Thank you again, and see you next time.